Well, you may be asking, what is this thing beside me? Well, it's the BVM F-100, the museum quality kit that we're refitting, refurbishing, refinishing. Not really refinishing, refurbishing is a better way to put it. So welcome guys to video number 5 in the series. We're continuing with our progress, making some wicked progress on this, this plane. Last video we just finished with the lights, which is why we've got the lights on right now. We're continuing with the video series, so dang, that's cool. All right, I got Nez on my shoulder, just coming along for the ride, taking care of quality control. So I've been keeping these horns around for a while. This video, let me preface it as well, is going to be a little bit of jumping around too as we're kind of finishing various items back and forth. Now I've been keeping these servo arms kicking around for a while. I don't remember where they came from. They might have came from a really old MKS servo, but they've got these various aluminum bands around the base, which I think is for reinforcement. But anyways, I thought they were really nice because they're extremely thick and they'll work great in a scenario like this. And the 10 mark here, which is the, I'm assuming 10 millimeters, lines up perfectly with the stock setup. So that is the perfect arm for our gear setup on the nose. Our tanks are done and cured, so we're able to take our tape off now. It's the next day, and we're gonna get our new clunks set up so we can get that done. With our belly lighting sorted out, we're gonna pull all this stuff back out and we're gonna get the air brake put back together. What we're gonna do is make sure we service these cylinders. So we talked about this in the live last night, but basically what I do is I take this cylinder, and as we move the cylinder, if you think about this, the piston right now is kind of sitting where my finger is. So if we extend this, that piston's going to be moving this direction, sucking air into this side. And then as we compress it, the piston's moving this way and sucking air into this side. So if we just hold our little dropper of silicone oil over top of those nipples, as we move that plunger, what's going to happen is it's going to suck in a drop or two of silicone oil into the air cylinders, which is going to help condition them and keep them in perfect new condition. So those are the 3 things we're going to get done here. I'll show you details as we work through it. All right, so tanks are all cured and ready to be fixed up. Now we did rinse these out when we got the bung fittings and all that stuff set up, so we're good there. So basically what we're going to do is we are just going to set this up in exactly the same type of manner that was originally done. So it's going to be laid out very much the same. Our length should be very much the same as well too. These clunks here look like they were almost touching the back. So we're going to be laying it out with a rigid piece of tube. The only difference is we're going to be high flow. We're going to tie wire these guys. So I'm going to gather the parts up. We'll get one of these put together and we'll show you the final result. Now generally if you were doing these tanks in parallel, so both tanks pulling at the same time, you would want to make sure that this stuff is as even as possible. The original setup was not even. There's a little bit of differences. The tanks will never pull perfectly equally. All right, so this clunk line is ready to go in. You can see there we've got the high flow clunk. I've already tested this one, and if you look at the brass tube, you may be able to see some marks there. That's from me just putting it in there and testing it. So it is extremely important to use this brass tube in the center. So that's the location of our baffle right there. Now the tube in the middle of this clunk setup, that's what we're using. So it's the 5.56 millimeter stuff, number 8130 from K&S. This is the stuff you find at your local hobby shop. So when I go to put this in, I put a little bit of saliva. You can also use silicone lube on the O-ring if you want. And you basically just make sure, obviously, that you're running the clunk through the baffle. Now one thing I do when I test this out and I put this together is I always mark the clunk or the bung fitting. I mark which way is up. And the reason for that is these tubes naturally have sort of an angle to them. And I generally always try and run the natural angle down on that last piece of tubing, and that just makes the whole system work better. So right now with that done, the clunk is sitting in the bottom of the tank. And now we'll just take that fitting and just do a little hi-ya on it. Nothing too crazy, no Loctite, nothing like that. And then you can just check that it's touching the bottom of the tank. I've already checked all this stuff. Doesn't touch the back of the tank, and it runs all the way to the top of the tank when inverted. There we go. So one tank's done. Now do the same setup on the other tank. All right, so now with the tanks done, we need to clamp them off and pressurize them and make sure that they're holding pressure. So what we're gonna do is I take some crimpable line. So like this is just thinner, this is BVM line is what it actually is. So something that crimps easy with forceps. And then I take a piece of Tygon. This is the large size Tygon. And we need to heat this one up and crimp it off. So you can just heat it with a lighter or a torch. Get it nice and cooking hot on the end. And then you just crimp it off with a pair of pliers. All right, so now we're crimped off there. Now you can blow through the bung fitting. The downside to doing that is if you have the pressure come out while you're blowing into it and you've got alcohol sitting in the tanks, or fuel, I guess, you do run the risk of obviously that alcohol coming out of the fuel pickup. So generally I will always blow and pressurize into the vent fitting. So we're gonna do our crimped off fittings on the tanks. The bung fittings. So now those are sealed off, and then we'll do our clampable fittings or pieces of tube on the vent lines. All right, then now all you do is blow into the tank, and while you've pressurized it with your mouth, you just clamp it off with some forceps. And I like just to put some saliva on the end there, make sure it's not coming out. Do the same thing on that one, but I think that one's good. And that's it. So you can leave this for a couple hours. You can leave it overnight. In this case, we're gonna leave it overnight. And tomorrow when we come back, so maybe 24 hours, 22 hours, and if we open these up and pressure comes out, we know these tanks are good to go. All right, so we undid the fitting here, the clamps, and this one was holding pressure. It's been 22 hours. And just did this one, and it did not hold pressure. So what I'll do is I'm gonna repressurize this guy, and you could do a couple things here. You could fill up a container of water, the sink, whatever, and you could submerge that tank in water. That's fine. I don't really feel like filling up the sink. So what I'll do first is I'll just take some rubbing alcohol or soapy water, and with pressure in the tank from our mouths, I'm going to spray down the tank and see if we've got an obvious area that is a quick fix. If that doesn't show up, then we will have to submerge the tank. All right, so I sprayed the tank down with rubbing alcohol, couldn't find anything obvious, so I had to go submerge the tank. And we've got a hole, a tiny little hole right here. There it is. Right there. Little tiny pinhole. So what I'll do now is I'll mark the hole. Confirm that's where it is. Yes. Yeah, so now with the saliva there, it's bubbling. So anyways, that's a tiny little micro hole, enough that, you know, after a couple hours, the air is gonna leak out. Now, you could probably put this tank together, run it like this because it's at the top of the tank here. So you're gonna fill it up. It's so small, there's not gonna be any fuel that comes out, but obviously it's not a good situation to leave something like that. So all we do in this case now is we'll just take our Dremel, we'll do a little bit of, you know, scuffing in this area, and then you can take some Hysol and just pop it over top of the scuffed up area, and it's good to go. So now we can disconnect this now that we know where the holes are, and tanks are good to go. All right, so took the Dremel, did a little bit of sanding there on our spot, and now I've mixed up just a little bit of Hysol here, 9462, and we will just do a little bit of this. And that takes care of the pinhole in the tank. Easy peasy. All right, so we're gonna get the nose gear reinstalled now. So yeah, previously we had taken this all apart, serviced it all, that's all good to go. We've got our new servo installed here, so we're ready to plug that into the receiver. We're gonna get our new arm installed and we're gonna get it set up exactly the same way. Now I'm going to take these guys off, and I'm going to be adjusting those balls a little bit, the ball joints and stuff, because I want to get this a little bit tighter. Previously, the installation was not super tight in the down position, so I want to make sure that's remedied, and these cables are nice and snug. So I'm going to get this prepped, and then we'll take a look at it. All right, so we've got the old horn off, and the new horn sitting here, and we've got the location where our previous holes were, which were the inner holes. All right, so we've got one of our servo sides hooked up here on the arm. We've got the gear basically ready to put back in. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this and get it reinstalled in the aircraft. So getting the gear installed first, getting our servo hooked up, and then what I'll do is I'll play with the cable lengths here and check and make sure that we have a good amount of tension when this gear is in the down position. All right, so nose gear is in, put a drop of CA on each of these 632 screws holding these gear in. That just helps solidify those screws in place. And then of course, if you need to get them out, they will come out. Because this is threading into carbon, really using Loctite isn't going to be a great option. We've got our steering servo installed. That is all nice and tight. I'm very happy with that now. I just need to confirm, so I'm gonna probably hook some lines up to the gear and confirm that it actually will extend all the way, because of course the more tension you put on these guys, locking that gear in place becomes possibly a bit of an issue. So that's something we need to double check. We've got our nose door cylinder all serviced. We put some silicone lube in there, that's all done. And we've got some leads coming off of there, or some lines. Now those lines are just gonna come over to T's right here, and we're gonna have one going to the main doors, and the other side of that T is gonna go forward to where all of our air cylinders are going. So I'm basically decided at this point that we're putting our compressor at the front here. We're gonna put our 1 or 2 air cylinders at the front, probably one, and then we're gonna have our air valves here as well too. So that all still needs to be sorted out, but the front section here is looking fabulous. So we sanded out the bottom of the fuselage between the air brake, and we want to get the piece of wood here glued down. Now this piece of wood is giving us a location for our gyro. Now there's no good visible location for our Cortex gyro in this aircraft, so this is the area we're going to do it. So we installed a bunch of West Systems 610 on that plate and got it lined up, squished it down, and then we put some exercise balls on top of it to let it cure and give it downward pressure. And this is going to give us some nice mounting area. All right, so I'll show you guys how I test the landing gear. So I just take one of my compressor nozzles. This has my shop air compressor hooked up to it. And for example, we want to go in the up position. So our red line is the up position. And I just take the air compressor, insert this. Now it doesn't tightly fit, it just fits loose. And I just kind of fold it against something like this where we can control the pressure a little bit. And there we go. So that gives us a shot on how that works. Everything retracts nicely, and we will do the exact opposite for the down position. And everything locks in nicely. So that's one of the checks you want to do, especially with something like this where you got the wires. Now that's not very common nowadays, but on this plane, of course, that's the setup. So, but that system works great. It is very tight here. You can see the previous builder actually sanded this section out a little bit. So it is quite snug in that opening, but it works perfectly. So that's good. Front gear is done. All right, so I did end up rearranging our servo outputs or function outputs, and I wrote everything out. So this is actually a list from the radio, and then I kind of rearranged things, and I'll show you and tell you why I rearranged things. So initially I thought I was going to do the leading edge slats. There's 4 servos. I was going to do 2 leading edge slats and have them run through a power box micro match because of lack of channels. But with our switch now to the Central Box 310, that changes things a little bit as far as programming. So we've got 18 ports on the Central Box 310. So what I did was I took some of our stuff that doesn't require a lot of power. So that would be the air brake solenoid, brake solenoid. These are all solenoids, air solenoids. They don't take a lot of power, and we've set those aside, if you can imagine that. So that's function 19 to 22 are those items. And we've installed leading edge slats, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we've taken 4 of those. We've got lights, the gear solenoid, gyro sense, chute servo, tail hook servo. Now when I took these were previously in port number 19 and 20. Those servo settings, which we already have set up when we did the back end of the aircraft, those servo settings don't transfer over because that's a function setting. So these numbers that were previously here, I just wrote down those numbers and copied them to this number 17 and this number 18 to make sure that those servos are still going to operate properly. So this is going to be our layout now. So all of these items are plugged into the Central Box 310. These 4 are going to go through an SE6 expander. Now this isn't a jetty item, it's actually an Esprit Tech or Esprit Elite item. I get these from Aeropanda in the US. But this SE6 allows you to run either 5 servos and still have the pass-through for the port you're plugged into, or you can run 6 servos, and this is the cable that we use to hook it up. So it's just a MR30 end and a standard servo end. So this plugs into here, this plugs into one of your E-ports on your Central Box. So now I've seen guys set planes up with servos through this thing, and that's totally fine. You just want to be mindful that you're not overloading this whole device, right? And that's where using air valves in that device is perfect. So that's why I rearranged those servo ports to only have air valves running through that SE6 expander. Now we do need to plug our compressor in still, but the compressor can go into a couple different options, so I'm not worried about that. We could plug it into the SE6, we could plug it into one of our E-ports on the Central Box. So I think we've got everything laid out good now. Now the reason I needed to get those servo ports rearranged was because I want to move on to the wings, which are hanging backwards over there. And we are doing the leading edge, of course, on the wings, and we need to be able to program and access those servos. So before we move on to the wings, I want to take care of our main door air cylinders. Because we're moving forward in this aircraft, I've skipped over these guys, and to keep things consistent, we need to take these guys off and get them serviced, new airlines installed, etc. So we're going to get that done. Pretty mundane stuff. It's the same as all the other air cylinders we've taken care of. I did remove the exercise balls this morning, and our plate that we installed here is nice and solid. The 610 adhesive, this is West Systems 610, has worked out very nicely, so that's all good. So I'm going to pull those guys off. One of the common questions I get is why would I use like West Systems 610 on that plate and not Hysol 9462? So we use 9462 for critical joints, not that that's not critical, but the West Systems 610 is a little bit more affordable as far as how much you get. So when I purchased the West Systems 610, it comes in a tube or a caulking tube like this, and basically, face tracks on. Basically this tube, it's not full, it's about half full because it's a mixture system. But anyways, this is for less critical joints and whatnot. This is what I'll use. But both are equally amazing adhesives. This stuff takes longer to actually fully cure. So 9462 Hysol, it kind of kicks off and hardens up in about 2 hours. you know, where you could work with it. 8 hours later, it's pretty stiff. It's pretty much cured. Obviously, full cure is beyond that. But like the West System 610, it's been 10 hours now, I think, since I glued that plate in. It was last night. And when I take my fingernail and push it into the epoxy there, it's still kind of, it's not gummy, it's a step beyond gummy, but you know, it takes like a full 24 hours to actually fully cure. So those are some of the differences. So we're going to put some tunes on in the shop. We're going to pull those air cylinders out, get them serviced, reinstalled, exactly the same as we've done with all the other ones. All right, so we've got our air cylinders. So we got our air cylinders reinstalled again, and our line comes, the only way it can go is through this bottom opening, because our main wing spar or carbon arm essentially sits right here. So this is where it goes. So we're going to take some spiral wrap, and we are going to wrap up those air lines, just a little section where it goes, travels through that area. So maybe like 3 inches of spiral wrap, and we'll get that installed over the airline. All right, so I put the duct back in and installed the UAT just to make sure we have room. It's not really installed anywhere. We got to make a mount for it, but it's kind of tucked in right there. So that UAT is the double fitting UAT. So I'll pull that out and show you guys, but we have decided to go with a parallel fuel system. So both tanks are going to be pulling into the UAT at the same time. That's just at the owner's request. So I know previously we talked about doing this in series, but we're going to do it as a parallel fuel system. So we've gone with the 6-ounce MAP UAT and the double fitting one, which is great. So I'll pull that out, show you guys exactly what it is, and now at least we have an idea of where we're going to mount it. All right, so this is our double UAT or double fitting UAT, and I'm going to glue probably a mount or make a mount so it sits right there on the side, and that will be great because it's not going to interfere with our duct and anything. So obviously we got to keep clear of these areas, but that should work out perfect. When we had it sitting in there, it was sitting down like that. So as long as we're tucked against that wall, that's great. And then while I had the duct in, I just confirmed that we're going to be installing the central box down here. And if we install that central box right there, it works out perfect. So yeah, that's a good plan going forward. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this stuff ready to mount and glue in. And I'm just trying to maximize efficiency really. So what I'm doing is I'm getting some gluing done on the fuselage, getting all the fuselage things done, and then we can move into the wings, which is going to be a big project, part of the project. So I want to make sure that I'm maximizing my time and not just waiting for glue to dry. And we've got both of our items ready to install here. So this is the mount that we'll be using for the UAT. So this gets glued to the side of the fuselage, and we just use zip ties to hold that in place. And then our mount for our central box, just 2 thin pieces of aircraft ply, whatever thickness this is, and our servo screws here, the larger size ones. The tip just starts to come through, which is perfect. So we'll put a bunch of aero epoxy here and get this guy stuck in place. Now, when we do this, when I glue these kind of things, I like to use aero epoxy, and then I'll use a little bit of CA as well too, which holds it in place while the aero epoxy cures. So I'm going to take my Dremel now, and we will get our fuselage sanded out and ready to install these guys. So what I'll do here is make a couple reference marks, so I know I need to sand this area, and this area to have a spot for the adhesive or aero epoxy to adhere to the fiberglass. All right, and these are the kind of moments that I like to use the 9462 with a nozzle. So we're using a lot of adhesive to glue all this stuff in place, and it's using the nozzle does waste a little bit. So I like to not use the nozzles all the time, but it allows us to get into areas that are tight and get that adhesive put exactly where we want it to be. So there. And what I've done is just put a couple spots of medium CA right on the top of that UAT holder. And now this holds it in place. We don't have to worry about clamping it or anything. And it's just a nice solution to get that kind of stuff glued in place without having to deal with a silly clamp or anything like that. So UAT holders in place. We also haven't glued our lights down as well too, so I'll get that done now that we've got the nozzle out, and I'm gonna get our center box glued in next. All right, and the center box kind of has some funny angles going on here. So on the bottom of the center box, we've got essentially the bottom edge of the plywood touching. On the top, we've got the top edge of the plywood kind of touching. And so that gives me an idea of where we're going to place our glue on there. So what I'll do in this case is we'll put a nice big bead on the bottom. So that we get good contact. And on the top of the central box, we'll put a nice big bead right there. And we do have to be mindful that we want to make sure that we have somewhere to put a little bit of CA on afterwards to get our spot gluing done. All right, so I've got my kicker and my CA on hand. And now we will get this placed in. And I kind of tucked the central box closer to the front of this little cavity here, just so we would have some extra area there to mount some electronic devices. I'm thinking of maybe putting the engine hub in that area, and we'll see what else fits. But so this is what I do here. So we've got a little bit of CA installed on the top. Spray some kicker. So now that is not going to go anywhere, and we'll just get our bottom little corners here CA'd. Like that. And that holds the bottom in place. Perfect. So now I'll just take my nozzle. I'm just going to fill in the little corners here so we've got nice, good contact. But that is awesome. I think people sometimes underestimate the amount of adhesive you use on a project like this. You know, you can easily, when you're redoing mounts and doing stuff like this, you could easily go through a couple of those containers or tubes of High-Sol. We've already gone through, if I count the stuff we used on that plate for the gyro, we've already gone through essentially 2 tubes of High-Sol, getting everything glued in place. So we've got those pieces glued. Last thing I'm going to do is just go get our corners of these lights epoxied down, and that'll be kind of the last thing we do here in the gluing phase of the fuselage. All right, so I was thinking about getting into the wings this video, but I think we'll just continue on with getting our fuselage ready and stuff, and then next video we'll move into the wings. So I've crimped these wires down or cinched them up with a zip tie, and now I'm going to start running our leads forward. So we've got our 2 flap servos to deal with, and then we also have our back end here as well, which has our ashlock connectors. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to get our fuselage attached to the front part of the fuselage, so rear attached to the front for the last time. And then we will start focusing on getting our wires run forward. I think that's probably the best solution. So we're done everything back there. That's good. We're done everything in this kind of section that we need to redo. So that's good. Man, there's so much more room back here. Remember all the equipment that was jammed in that area? Crazy, crazy, crazy. So cool. Just doing a little bit more thinking, I think I'm going to probably, because the UAT is sitting right in this area right here, nice straight shot with that, that lead or 8mm line coming off of the UAT. We'll probably end up mounting our fuel pump right here as well too. I think that's going to work good, and then our engine's sitting, you know, right in this area, so it's a nice short run on everything, which is awesome. Just again, doing some out loud planning. All of our wires either need to run through the center rib here between the gear, or we can run them up here. Now previously there was little holders right here and the wires were run right there, which is fine. If we do that, we just need to be mindful of the tanks. We've got a little bit of space between these tanks, so that needs to be thought out. So maybe what I'll plan on doing is running the wires up here and through this little slot right here, and then that's a nice straight shot right into the central box. I think that is probably good. We are rearranging the wires and air lines going to the wings. Now I have thought about this and kind of planned things out. So previously the air lines were coming to here, and I'll show you on the wing where this location is, and the wires were coming to right here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to keep the wires in this area, and we're going to have our air lines run through here. Now there's a lot more room in the wing than there is the fuselage. So this plane, when it was originally put together, you know, you have a couple servo leads going in right here, and they kind of tuck into this tube, and the airlines come out right here. So I'm making this better, making it more simple. So our airlines, there's 3, gear up, gear down, and brake. They're going to be run over to this area here. So our wires are going to stay the same. We'll probably open this up a little bit so our ash lock connector can go inside the wing. And then our air lines are right here, and the airline connectors will also go inside the wing. But this is all wide open right here. The only, I guess, issue that we have is getting past the carbon spar here. So we need to make sure we can get past that. I think we can. I think I looked at that already, but that's just some initial planning here for you. And I'm hoping I can pick this up on camera. Right in the center of your screen is the wing side of that carbon piece. So there's metal structure in there, and there's actually channels that go right through the carbon. So there is some holes there. It looks like they left that open. Thank you, Bob Violet. When you design this, with some holes in that carbon spar so things can pass through, which is fantastic. So it's always wonderful when I find when I'm thinking about this stuff and a plan comes together and you've got a straight path going forward. So what we're going to do now is get the rear part of the fuselage prepped, ready to install. Quite a simple process with those 4 fasteners. We are going to put a little bit of Loctite on these guys as well too. We'll do that now before we get the rear end connected or installed. So we've got better access from the backside. Unfortunately, these, like I mentioned, these set screws to hold the fuselage together. Very nice design on these BVMs, and this makes it very easy to work on. So just putting some initial Loctite on these guys, just a little bit, doesn't need to be crazy, because these are setting into carbon rods, right? So it's not like it's a huge clamp or anything like that. But the reason we're using Loctite on these guys is because the owner does not plan on taking the rear part of the fuselage off, and we really don't need to, with the way everything's designed now, there's no reason to separate the fuselage unless something very wrong happens. So there we go. So we got Loctite ready to go. Let's bolt the rear part of the fuselage on this aircraft. So I am very happy with how much more simple everything is designed now compared to how it was previously. Beautiful. That's very slick. So we still have good access there for all of our servos and stuff, but let's get this guy bolted in. So obviously putting some forward pressure to make sure everything lines up. And just get those set screws installed. Now you don't have to go too crazy because it is, again, going into carbon, solid carbon rods. So you could over tighten those guys and crush the carbon, but I think this is perfect. There's also a little indent in the carbon rod as well, which helps hold everything together. Man, what a gorgeous aircraft this thing is. It's just stellar. So we've also been working on this plane with our Lukey stand kind of compressed a little bit. So now we also have the opportunity to extend the Lukey stand out because our fuselage is fully together. And there we go. Very nice. So that airplane is put together for the last time. Fuselage is joined. Man, that thing is so beautiful. Gorgeous. All right, and there's our inside all joined together, looking wonderful. There's a lot going on in the back end of that aircraft, but I think we've done a great job cleaning it up and keeping things nice and simple. So we've got our connectors here, which what I'm going to do is leave these a little bit loose, most likely. And we'll have our other connectors which plug into these guys. So if you ever want to take this fuselage apart, obviously we want to make sure that it's possible to do so. So these guys will be run this way. Our two flap servos will be run that way. And that's pretty much the stuff in the back end. We are going to have the light on top of the hatch here. Because this side plugs in and our latches are here, we do need to just make a plug-in for it. So that's fine, but basically everything in the back end running forward is it's there and ready to go. So that's awesome. And with our central box installed, we can actually conceivably just run those guys, make those leads up perfectly and get them plugged in because we've already got our ports and everything designated. So that's good. I feel like I'm organized. And now that we're doing some wiring, it's time to transfer our layout of all of our items onto our Rhino 4200, which is our shrink tube printer. And we got those all printed out. So I do my label, 4 spaces, label, 4 spaces, and just print them all out at one time. This stuff is fairly expensive, but just try and maximize the usage of it. So anyways, that's wiring start. So because we have our central box position and everything solidified now, and we know where the wires are running to, when we have a scenario like wiring up this back end, we can do all of our leads the perfect length. So for example, this is the right flap and it's cut to the perfect length. So I'm going to get our female connector, which plugs into the servo on this end, our label installed, and then our male connector, which plugs into the central box installed on this end, and everything is perfectly sized. So we've got our right flap line run and done up. Also installed some line keepers. Now, these keepers I'm using rather than bundling it all together because this is really the amount of space that we've got in between the tank and the wall of the fuselage here. So everything's very, very tight. We could, route them through here and then bundle them down, but downside there is the tank sits really tight to this former too. So anyways, I think it's nice and clean going this route. So as we get these wires done up, we're just gonna route them nice and clean to the central box location. And there we have our back end wired all the way to the front. So everything is looking stellar. Happy with how this all worked out. The right-hand side of the central box here, I left a little bit longer so we can have a cable holder that holds all of these guys like this. And then we can have another one that holds our far wires like that. So that's how we've got everything organized. So that is turning out stellar. I'm happy. Everything looks good. And that, guys, wraps up video number 5 in the museum refit and refinish of the BVM F-100 aircraft. Video number 5 wasn't wings. I thought it was going to be wings, but it's not. We're going to start wings next video, and yeah, happy with the progress so far. Also, next video, we will be doing the draw for the UAT giveaway from the Rebel Hot build. So if you are interested in being part of that giveaway for the UAT. Make sure you check out the Rebel Hot video, and in video 6 of this series, we will be drawing for the winner. So you still have time to get that done. So as I mentioned, this has been a fun project so far, been an interesting one. I feel like we have a good path forward now. The wings are definitely going to be a challenge. They're going to be a big part of the next video. Encourage you guys to check out the Lighter Side of RC After Dark. The After Dark is our separate channel where we do live streams here from the shop. We usually do it every 2 weeks during the winter, and usually Saturday evenings, our time, at about 7 o'clock Mountain Time. So check it out. Lighter Side of RC After Dark. It's fun if you're on there during the live because you get to interact with us, ask us questions, all real time. So anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. Thanks for tuning into the content. We'll see you in the next video.